Anyway, Don, what do you got for us this week?
Well, I've been on the last couple months talking about the failures of Christianity, and there are many such failures, and there are many large failures. And I'm hoping that in doing this, it will beg the question in people's mind of how this omnipotent God is allowing this to happen, or how these religions that are supposedly in favor of this God are able to make such huge mistakes. And in the past I've talked about the abortion policies in the U.S. as being a giant failure, Christian-based abortion policies. I've talked about the genocide of the Jews. It's a failure no matter how you slice that. Today I want to look at the failure of the Catholic Church in particular in dealing with its pedophilia problem. Now, most people know that child molestation is wrong, right? Children are vulnerable, they're trusting, they're easily manipulated. So using children for sex is an abuse of power, and our secular laws and our secular values reflect this, and we have laws against this sort of thing. Okay, but Christianity is rather confused on this. First, children are targets of indoctrination, right? If there's this great quote by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, Saint Ignatius Loyola, "Give me a boy until he is 7, and I will give you the man." And the idea here is, this is from the early 1500s, probably. The idea here is that it just takes 7 years of the first 7 years of a kid's life to indoctrinate them and turn them into a believer or whatever. So also, children are treated as a means to an end. In the Bible, they're treated as arrows of God, or if you ever go to a Catholic wedding, you're supposed to have lots of children to keep the church alive. And there's this idea that souls are more important than bodies, so if there's abuse or whatever, it doesn't matter as long as they're saved. So there's not a lot of whole prohibitions against this. Like if you look in the Bible, there's killing children for God is okay with Abraham and Jephthah. Sex with children is okay. You have Lot messing with his daughters, making babies with his daughters in Genesis.
Well, to be fair, that's not portrayed as okay.
Well, no, he was called later a just and righteous man in the Bible.
No, before he was called a just and righteous man. That's why he was saved from Sodom.
Okay.
But in any case,
we can debate that offline. When the Catholics are saying, well, this is wrong, they point to, of all things, the biblical commandment against adultery, where neither party is married. Most people, I think of adultery as having to do with marriage. Anyway, and the other failure is if the pedophiles are praying for a sign from God or whatever, they're not going to get it. So they're going to get whatever answer they want. So we've got a problem here, and I think the church either attracts or makes sexual deviants. So this is really a big part of the problem. So those people who are called to God, maybe they're young and they're naive and they're attracted to the power of the church, but they don't really necessarily realize the burden of celibacy and how difficult that is, especially for a younger person. And they, because they enter the priesthood often very early, they don't end up establishing normal adult relationships with people, and I think that this is part of the problem. And maybe the Catholic Church appeals to people who really like being around kids, because you certainly are exposed to a lot of kids, and this can provide a lot of temptation. For some people, I think that the Catholic Church provides this drama with sin, where you are sort of self-flagellating yourself or self-loathing because you're sinful and you're inherently evil, but you're going to get redemption through the church or through worship. You're going to get forgiveness, and I think that attracts people who are deviates, who are looking for some sort of redemption. And we find that in a study done by the John Jay College in 2004 on the pedophile priests, 19% of those had substance abuse problems. Maybe some of these people are molested as children. It turns out that 7% of the people doing this were molested themselves. And maybe they want to have that power over others. Or maybe they developed a warped sense of sexuality based on religion trying to control it. But here, we have all sorts of potential inroads here for people to become abusive of children through the church. So I think the church attracts naive and broken people looking for a cure, or looking for a better life, for which the church does not provide, because God doesn't really exist and doesn't have any power to do all these things. So, the people that go and serve as priests end up perpetuating these sorts of evils into the next generation. So, say you're the Catholic Church now, and you've figured out you've got a problem on your hands. You've got all these pedophile priests running around, and they're getting into trouble. How do you solve it? What are you going to do? Well, if you're a secular organization, you deal with the problem, but with secular tools. You use the law. You are open about it. You deal with the problem immediately. You address it. You take care of the victims. These sorts of things. You provide training to your people to avoid this. You do background searches. You have zero tolerance policies. These sorts of things. These are the secular ways of dealing with it. And this has been successful in many organizations. But if you're the Catholic Church, you call it a spiritual problem to be fixed by prayer. Now let's open that up a little bit. That reminds me a lot of our governor here, who called budgets and finding jobs in the state a spiritual problem that was in need of prayer. It seems like it's a cop-out. It's a way of saying, well, I'm supposed to do this thing, but if I screw up, we'll blame God, because if God doesn't answer a prayer. And us atheists have a phrase, nothing fails like prayer. So what else did the Catholic Church do? It hid the fact and tried to sweep it under the rug. So it created a wall of secrecy regarding these sorts of incidents, and actually there was an edict created that mandated this sort of secrecy, and that all of the penalties and things were handled through the Catholic Church and circumvented any local law enforcement. So they disabled a lot of secular mechanisms that could have helped. So there's a lot of victims that have been bought off. There are victims that have been browbeaten and threatened with hell or excommunication, these sorts of things. The Catholic Church has moved people around, hoping it would get better, and it didn't. So God, the Bible, prayer, and all their magic crackers, blood of Jesus, rosaries and relics, and all this stuff that they have on their side that supposedly gives them all these magical powers, failed. Every last one of them failed to solve the problem. And as a result, we have tens of thousands of victims that we know about over at least 50 years. In some Vatican documents, it goes back to, it was recognized in 1741 that they had a sex abuse problem. So this has been around a while. It took off in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This involves multiple countries, and it's been, a failure for Catholicism too, because it's cost in the United States has cost them $2.6 billion. To deal with payouts to the victims and these sorts of things, and what a waste of money, and what a waste of sad harm to children. So it's a failure of Catholicism as well. I mean, no matter how you slice it, is a failure. So when faced with such a blatant and obvious failure, how did the Vatican respond? Well, they respond with lies and spin. They claim that there's no harm to the victims, or that it's just a few bad apples, or they attack the credibility of the victims. They're children after all. They can't be trusted. They went into manipulation mode, so they browbeat people into, submissions, saying, you're going to go to hell if you tell, threatened with excommunication. There was one victim that was told, Jesus died for your sins, so you think you could handle that. And I think that's just really sad. It's sort of saying, well, you've bought into this whole idea that you get to go to heaven, for just believing, then you can suffer. It's okay if you suffer. They evaded. They've claimed that church-state separation allows them to do whatever they want and evade whatever laws. They've actually claimed that. They've stonewalled criminal investigations. They've pride that they've run out of money for bankruptcy, and that they're a wonderful charity, and gosh, look at all this charity that's going down the drain. The Pope himself has claimed diplomatic immunity to evade any sort of justice. And there's been a lot of blame shifting. They've blamed the gays, they've blamed reporters, they've blamed the permissive culture of the United States, they've blamed the devil, they've blamed pornography, they've blamed, the Vatican has blamed the individual dioceses, although the Vatican has been exerting a lot of control over them. So what we see here is a very reluctant movement by the Vatican towards secular morality that would have greatly mitigated this harm. And what's really sad is there was a set of guidelines published back in 1978 about how to deal with this, and they were completely ignored. So a lot of this harm is just completely gratuitous. The latest guidelines that the Vatican has issued are still suggestions for the diocese. It's still, you know, just a slap on the wrist. And there is still an edict in play that says to run all pedophilia complaints through the Vatican in secret and hide it from the law. So there's no real house cleaning here. The current Pope himself has shuttled priests around. He has actively participated in the cover-up, and this is supposedly the best Christian in the entire universe, and this is your representative. So, and the Vatican has done its usual thing of talking out of both sides of its mouth. It's claiming to the victims that, oh, we're fixing this problem, but their policies really aren't changing. And I blame the laity too, because, you know, ultimately all of the money and power in the Catholic Church comes from the people who donate money and follow their orders. And there's a failure extends to all of Christianity, I think, too, because there's this notion of religious tolerance and not talking bad about this other thing. And you know, for all the money and time that the Christians have spent trying to screw over gays, for example, or trying to get married, they could have maybe cleaned house here and actually made the world a better place. So from an atheist perspective, the failure of the Vatican to deal with this problem is an obvious consequence of a broken model of the world, right? If you start with a broken model of the world, you're going to make mistakes. And prayer doesn't work. I think the Vatican has proved that very well. Children should not be exploited. That's just a pretty obvious thing, and that's what's got a lot of people pretty angry at the Catholic Church, myself included. And there are lots of lies that cause more trouble than good, and they've just been caught in their lies over and over again, and a lot of us are pretty fed up with it. So the failure was so big it shot the Catholic Church in the foot, although a lot of Catholics are still hardcore believers. And the failure is largely of their own making, their own design. So it's clear there's no God involved in fixing this mess, despite the claims that there's some big God out there that supposedly has some special relationship with the Catholic Church. It's clear that their main techniques are lies, manipulation, and spin, and you know, they're using the same tactics that they use to market their religion to the global masses, as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know why anybody would trust this organization. I certainly don't. I don't know why we as a country are giving these people tax breaks, because they're obviously a criminal organization. And you know, we should blow up this crime ring and bring them all to justice. So that's what I wanted to say today.
And in completely unrelated news, earlier this month, Ireland announced that the Vatican was no longer welcome at its embassy. They swear that this has absolutely nothing to do with the Cloyne report, which Prime Minister Enda Kenny said that the report exposed the dysfunction, disconnection, elitism, the narcissism that dominates the culture of the Vatican to this day. But both Ireland and the Vatican are saying that their expulsion from the embassy has nothing to do with this, and that relations between them are just fine. And they're pointing to the fact that Iran and Southeast Asian countries were also excluded from the embassy as cost-cutting measures. In any case, I thought it was funny.
Well, they're trying to play the country card, right? They want to be a country just when just when they want to use the diplomatic
Yeah.
community, you know, to go do harm in other countries.
They're a nation state. They just aren't very cooperative with law enforcement when it comes to issues. But so anyway, we're going to go ahead and